The story often goes like this. After World War II, Japan became the ultimate success story of democracy exported from the West. A pacifist and democratic nation rising from the literal ashes of a brutal and expansionist empire. But what if I told you this success story was engineered in a prison cell? What if I told you the very men who ravaged Asia with slave labor and opium were the same men the Americans handpicked to run the new Japan? Let's dive into the dark and forgotten history of post-war Japan and discover the link that united for decades Japanese politics, the Yakuza, and the CIA. The year is 1931. The Japanese army seizes the Chinese region of Manchuria and turns it into a puppet state, Manchukuo. Behind the scenes, a brilliant hedonistic bureaucrat named Nobusuke Kishi is running the show. He is more interested in industrial rationalization than in following basic human rights. For Kishi, the Chinese were lawless bandits and dogs that better be used as slave labor. Under his 5-year plans, millions of Chinese were conscripted to work in mines. There, the death rate was so high they had to be replaced by the tens of thousands every year. Back in Japan during the war, he met and befriended an original and shady character. Enters Yoshio Kodama. In the 1930s, Kodama was a right-wing activist who had already done time for trying to assassinate a prime minister. During the war, he became the Navy's purchasing agent in occupied China. There, his business was nothing less than a plunder machine. He requisitioned metals at gunpoint and ran a massive opium ring out of Shanghai. By the end of the war, Kodama was one of the richest men in Asia, with a personal fortune of around $165 million, equivalent today to 3 billion. By 1945, these two men were the definition of what America was fighting against. Kishi had even co-signed the declaration of war against the United States. So they were thrown into Sugamo Prison as Class A war criminals. They waited for the gallows, but something unexpected happened. They became, overnight, America's best friends. Because, when needed, geopolitics can become surprisingly flexible. As the war just came to an end, a new enemy appeared for the US: communism. Suddenly, the American occupation of Japan, led by Douglas MacArthur, had a problem. The Japanese right wing was purged, but the Reds were coming. The Americans needed a bulwark against the Soviet Union, and they realized that the new liberal politicians they were backing were not strong enough to hold the line. They needed strong men, they needed monsters. In Sugamo Prison, Kishi and Kodama became cellmates. While waiting for trial, they were scouted by Charles Willoughby, MacArthur's chief of intelligence. Willoughby had a plan, recruiting war criminals to build clandestine espionage networks called Kikan to crush communist groups in Japan. The use of Kikan was not new. The Japanese Army and Navy already used them prior to and during the war to gather intelligence. In December 1948, the day after several other Japanese war criminals were executed, Kishi and Kodama walked completely free. No charges, no trial. Suddenly, they all became very fond of democracy. But you don't build a new political system on democracy alone. You build it on cold, hard cash. And the goal was simple: unify the conservatives and crush the left. The CIA used Kodama to facilitate clandestine operations. They even bankrolled a tungsten smuggling ring during the Korean War, where the CIA provided 2.8 million to move strategic metals out of Japanese military supplies. The money was then used to fund the Conservative Party that will dominate the Japanese political landscape, as we will soon see. Kodama, however, proved to be a professional liar and outright thief, leading the Tokyo station to eventually stop working with him in 1953. I mean, what do you expect from a war criminal who made his fortune running opium rings? Honestly. So, they turned their full attention on Nobusuke Kishi. For a year, Kishi met secretly with CIA's officials. He promised to follow America's plan for the land of the rising sun, such as keeping US military bases and nuclear weapons in Japan. In exchange for his obedience, Kishi received secret and substantial political support. In 1955, the CIA helped Kishi engineer the Union of Conservative Parties to create the Liberal Democratic Party. This created the 1955 system, a one-party dominance that lasted over 40 years. The CIA didn't just support the party, they ran it on a seat-by-seat basis, providing payoffs to key members for at least 15 years. While the LDP was being built in the light, the CIA and military intelligence were running shadow operations in the dark. You know, mind control experiments, illegal abductions, the whole CIA cookbook. For example, Project Bluebird, the first project that will lead to the infamous MK-Ultra program. In 1950, CIA operatives arrived in Japan to test behavioral techniques. To be clear, it was mind control and interrogation using barbiturate drugs on suspected double agents and North Korean prisoners. The project, tested in Japan, were considered a success and then expanded in Southeast Asia and in Europe. Then there was the Cannon organ. Led by Agent Jack Cannon, this extrajudicial agency engaged in the illegal abduction and torture of left-wing activists. Famously, they snatched the novelist Kaji Wataru, held him for over a year, and tortured him to try to force him into becoming a double agent. And perhaps most chilling of all was the cover-up of Unit 731. If you know what this unit did, sorry for the reminder. If you don't, ignorance is a blessing. Believe me. In these early days of the Cold War, the goal was for the US to gain a head start in biological warfare research over its Soviet rival. To do so, the Americans deliberately obscured evidence of Unit 731 experimentation in Manchukuo in exchange for a transfer of information. To make matters worse, many of its scientists, including his director Shiro Ishii, were never judged. To this day, we still don't know the exact extent of the crime committed by Unit 731. By the late 1950s, the system was complete. It was what historians called the Iron Triangle, a collusion between the CIA, the Liberal Democratic Party, and the Japanese organized crime, the Yakuza. The Yakuza was not a new player in a game, dating back to the Meiji era for its organization and even to the Tokugawa era for its roots. After the war, the different clans of the organized crime became almost essential for the stability of the defeated Japan. They were neither fully endorsed nor condemned by either the Japanese government or the US occupation authorities. Officials often preferred to look the other way, while the Yakuza controls the distribution of scarce goods, such as food, fuel or clothing, provided protection and dispute resolution where police capacities were limited, and organized labor in docks, constructions, and entertainment districts. Also, as we saw previously, the US authorities used them, of course with plausible deniability, to disrupt leftist activities and movements, while the rightist political parties use the Yakuza as their muscles to protect them. This is how Yoshio Kodama reappeared in our story. In 1960, Nobusuke Kishi, then Prime Minister for a few years, faced popular opposition over the then highly unequal Security Treaty. At that time, the treaty allowed US troops to be stationed in Japan, but the US was not obliged to defend the land of the rising sun if it was attacked, and the protests were massive. Millions of Japanese marched down the street to protest against the treaty. So Prime Minister Kishi, not just calling the police, decided to take more radical measures. He called his old friend Yoshio Kodama. Kodama, still in organized crime, mounted a private army of 30,000 Yakuza and right-wing veterans to protect US President Eisenhower during his planned visit to Japan. And the chaos was indescribable. A female protester was murdered, and Eisenhower eventually cancelled his visit. For Kishi, the disgrace was absolute, so he resigned within a month. But the system he built, based on structural corruption, remained as the money kept flowing. The CIA even used the media tycoon Matsutaro Shoriki to manipulate Japanese media into a pro-US and anti-communist stance during most of the 60s. All of this could not stay secret forever. In the 1970s, the Lockheed bribery scandal revealed the extent of the corruption in a system. Lockheed, the American aircraft manufacturer, had used Kodama to funnel over $7 million in bribe to Japanese officials to secure plane deals. The CIA reportedly participated in a cover-up, citing national security, to conveniently hide the name of those involved. Finally, Kodama's career ended not with a gallows but with a stroke and, I swear this is real, a failed kamikaze attack by an ultra-nationalist porn actor who flew a plane into his mansion. Kodama survived to finally die from another stroke in 1984. So the irony is this: the democratic Japan that still exists today was built on the foundation of the very roots America claimed to destroy. The LDP, the party the CIA built, remains the dominant force in Japanese politics, and an LDP Prime Minister is running Japan as I'm shooting this video. The structural corruption they established became the backbone of the state. We like to think of history as a clean break between the bad old days of the war and the good new days of peace. But the sources tell a different story. The monsters didn't go away, they were just rebranded. Thank you for watching this video in this series about Japan. More untold pages of history are on the way, so if you don't want to miss any, please consider subscribing, leaving a like, and sharing your thoughts in the comments. These, as you know, help tremendously. This is Forgotten Fragments. Until next time, for the next story.